just wrapped up a conversation with Dave Ficken, and he is with LINC, and there is a link to LINC in the description here where you get your podcast. And I'm just reflecting back on our conversation, which you're going to hear in just a few minutes. An amazing conversation of what the followers of Jesus can do in the 21st century world, especially in America, in the inner city. You may not live in the inner city. Maybe you're out in the suburbs of a major city, or maybe you're out in the hinterland of the world, and things are going pretty well for you. And I'm so thankful. I'm glad. But there are people that are literally dying in the inner cities to hear the good news of Jesus Christ. And that's what the Reflection Podcast is about, and that's what this conversation is about with Dave Ficken of LINC. And I'm glad that you found us, and I hope that you will stick around. At the end, I'll tell you more about how you can get in contact with Dave, as well as other resources so that you can reflect God's love and light in Jesus Christ in this dark world on this episode of the Reflection Podcast. In the pastor's office with me today, Dave Ficken. Thanks for joining me today. Am I getting that right?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yep, absolutely. Good to be with you.
Hey, it's great to have you here. I'm looking forward to our conversation. In fact, because I don't know you that well, we've met a couple times here in the Chicagoland area, face to face. But you know you better than I know you. So why don't you give us a kind of a biography of who Dave is for our listeners and watchers?
Yeah, well, I just recently moved back to Chicagoland, and having been away from Chicagoland, it's good to be back. I grew up in Aurora, on the far western suburb side of Chicago. And it's good to be among Cub fans again. Like, it's just,
You're not.
no, not today. I'm not.
I'm a White Sox
Maybe
fan.
some of your listeners. There we go. I love it. And so it's fun to be back in Chicagoland. Growing up here, as a pastor's kid, and being a part of a church in Aurora was just a real blessing in my life, having mentors there, and then going to college in Wisconsin. Concordia University, Wisconsin, was a great experience for me.
Yes.
Is that also your alma mater?
It is, and I graduated in 1987, so several years before you were there.
Just a little bit before me.
But we've had lots of alumni on the podcast from Concordia, Wisconsin, because it's the best Concordia.
Clearly. Had a great 4 years there. Really enjoyed that. And then it was while I was there in school, I was studying to do youth ministry in the church. So definitely wanted to be involved in ministry, but really did not want to become a pastor. In some ways, I kind of felt like I was probably stiff-arming God a little bit, but God not interested in 4 more years of school at the seminary, not really interested in doing the pastor thing, until God just shared some scripture with me through a very dear friend of mine in school, and all of a sudden started thinking about seminary. And 2 weeks later, I was enrolled for the next year. I took Greek independent study with one of the men that like will strike the fear of God into you, but you have the most respect for. Wayne Rasmussen taught me Greek in the course of 10 weeks. We only gathered for like 45 minutes a session 3 times a week. So it's not nearly as in depth as the summer school Greek classes at the seminary, but I learned enough to be able to pass my qualifier, and then was heading to St. Louis soon after that.
I also learned Greek from Coach Rat.
No kidding.
Yeah, he taught. We took 2 years of it. I was a pre-sem student, so major, and yeah, we took 2 years of Greek with Coach, and then also a winterim, an intensive where we studied classical Greek, Herodotus. So,
Ooh.
yeah, that was impressive.
Did he also like just put the fear of God into you, or was he a little bit softer in his earlier years?
no, he was not. Yeah, I was a mental midget. That was Coach. Yeah, he was
I
great.
love it.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
we've
yeah.
definitely have walked the same path. It sounds like the same. So we've walked the same dirt. So,
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So I have really fond memories of going to school there. Then ended up in St. Louis for seminary. Did my vicarage in Columbus, Nebraska. Go Big Red. My dad's a big Nebraska fan. Grew up in Nebraska. I love getting to cheer on the Huskers. In fact, as we're recording this, the Huskers have their first game tomorrow night
wow.
against Cincinnati and Kansas City. So excited for that. But yeah, we're after seminary, then I knew God was opening up the doors to plant a church. And that was kind of the calling that he was putting on my heart. And so through the call process coming out of seminary, it was either going to end up in San Diego, California, which I was all about that,
I'm
like
sure.
in the highly spiritual way of looking for surfboard racks for the
Hmm.
top of my car, like, and I don't even know how to surf, but if you move to California, clearly that's something you have to do to be a part of the culture there. And God just kind of laughed, and
Yeah.
with mentors around me, helped me learn how to pray through such a big decision like that, and ended up moving to Nashville by way of Arkansas, and got to plant a church in Nashville. If you've ever been to Nashville, if you know where all the honky tonks are on
Mhm.
Broadway, our church was just about 5 blocks from there, meeting in a concert venue bar. And man, that was just such a joy. Like the people that God put around us, the people we got to serve, was just a real blessing. Um, we loved getting to serve in that way. Unfortunately and sadly, like our church plant closed after 5 years, and so that was a really hard season for my wife Mia and I. That also happened at the same time that we had a miscarriage. So in the matter of 3 months, we felt like our baby, the church, died, and our child died, and that was a 2018 was definitely the hardest year of our lives. We learned a lot about sadness and grief and suffering and those kinds of things. And in the years since then, learned so much about resurrection hope, how God breathes new life in places where you've experienced loss and death and sadness. And now we try to apply that resurrection confidence that we have in God to any challenge that we face, and that's been just really life changing for our family.
Help me. Let's go back a little bit, and you've had a little bit of gap between your undergrad and your and going to seminary. What was the process? How was God moving you in that direction?
Oh, great question. Yeah, so it actually worked out in timing that I went right from undergrad into seminary, and so but it was about 6 months before I graduated from Concordia, that a friend of mine sent me an email, and it was just simply to set up a meeting in the library for some kind of class project we were working on or something, and she said, "Oh, and by the way, I've been reading from the book of First Timothy. You should check out these verses. They've been really meaningful to me." And so I just went ahead on my computer, opened up that passage, started reading it, and um, in that moment, very much felt a heavy weight on my chest and my shoulders, and I said, "Uh oh, something's going on here," and my brain became fixated on going to seminary, which up to that point, the only time I thought about seminary was when I thought to myself, I will never go there,
Yeah.
you know? And so then God just used those passages because in First Timothy 1, Paul is telling people, um, if God can use me, the chief of sinners, as an example of his unlimited patience, um, then he can pretty much use anybody. And my best role as a follower of Christ is to simply point out how short I fall and how faithful God is. And so in a lot of ways that I've seen that play out in my life now.
I think that's important to reiterate. That's why I wanted you to tell that because I went the traditional route. I went to Concordia. I went to college to be a pastor. I ended up being 3 years at Concordia. I did a year at community college first to get some of that out of the way, and I that was always the goal was to get to seminary and become a pastor. But that so it can happen that way. That's very traditional, but you took a sort of a non-traditional route, and there are many non-traditional routes that I think that uh, we have we overlook that these are the best kind of pastors there are. I mean, I've been able to roll in 30 years of being a pastor by going the traditional route, but it takes all kinds to serve the church and to bring the gospel to others. And I want people to understand that you don't have to go traditional routes. There are other ways. There are other paths. God's path is always the best path, but sometimes He doesn't tell us what it is right away.
Oh, isn't that the truth? Can I just share a quick
Sure.
story? Um, 2 weeks ago, I'm putting my 9-year-old son to bed, and having just moved here, it's been a difficult transition for all of us, but certainly as a 9-year-old, you feel the loss of not being able to see your friends that you're going to school with all the time. And for about 8 months, personally, I was like nervous for the time that the conversation came up when my son would hear me talk about why we moved to Chicago, and it has everything to do with God's calling on our lives and where we sense God's leading us. And intuitively, I knew he had to be thinking, so is it God's fault that I had to say goodbye to all my friends? And um and I'm so proud of the way he named. I mean, he was kind of angry, ticked at God that when we were going to bed, two weeks ago, and he we processed through that and shared just a little bit. And I said, I never wanted to go to seminary to be a pastor, but when God was calling me, I knew I needed to go. And I honestly wasn't thinking I wanted to move to Tennessee. I would California. My son's like, "Why didn't you go to California? That'd be so much cooler, Dad." And and then he had it click. He said, "Oh, if you would have gone where you wanted to go and not listened to God, then you would have never met Mom. And if you would have never met Mom,
Wouldn't be
I wouldn't be here." And
here.
it unlocks something in him, and the conversation of, and that's for all of us, like there's always things we want to do, but when God's calling us to do something, even if it's hard in that moment, knowing that He will be faithful beyond what you can see or imagine right now, is a promise that we can absolutely anchor our lives on.
Yeah, out of the mouths of babes comes the truth.
Mm,
That's awesome. So that
yep.
gets you up to Chicago. So what is it that you do here in the city beautiful, or at least the suburbs?
Yes, yes. And so after I was done church planting, I stepped into a season of about 6 years serving with PLI, Pastoral Leadership Institute, and served as the North American director, getting to see a lot of um, leadership, mission, and discipleship developed in leaders around the country. And that was an absolute joy. It also gave me the opportunity to just see what's happening in God's church across the country, and PLI is serving leaders, around the world. And so even got a glimpse into some of what's happening around the world, and especially what's happening, you know, just rapidly in Africa and then in South America, but also in the underground ways in Asia, is just remarkable. And you begin to appreciate how the Spirit of God is at work in different ways in different places, and loved getting to be a part of that. It was a real joy. But then, yeah, this then came the move to Chicago to get to be a part of LINC. And LINC LINC's vision is for everyone in Chicagoland to experience the gospel from someone they know in a way they can understand. And so, what brought me to LINC? A 10 million person opportunity.
Hmm.
Um, here's 10 million people in the greater Chicagoland area, and what an incredible opportunity to join the LINC team and be about the raising of Christian leaders to make an impact wherever they live, um, and facilitate and catalyze collaboration amongst Christians all over the city of Chicago. That gets me kind of fired up and is worth making a move for.
Yeah. What is LINC? Tell us a little bit about LINC itself.
Yeah, so LINC stands for Leaders in Every Community. LINC trains Christians to uh, discover their calling, know how they can serve the one person that God's put in their life. And then if God starts to open more and more doors, we come alongside of that leader to help them turn that from their own expression of mission, where they're serving somebody in their community, to maybe make it a little bit bigger and invite other people into it. And maybe it becomes a ministry. Maybe it even becomes a nonprofit or a for-profit business that's there for kingdom purposes. We help walk alongside of those leaders to make sure that as they live out God's calling on their life, they don't ever have to walk alone. So that that looks like a lot of collaboration and networking around the city, but then very practically for that leader that wants to know how they can take their idea, make it clearer, and then invite others to be a part of that with them. We do 7 weeks of training called a mission accelerator. That helps them wrestle with some of the biggest questions that if what you're doing today were to turn into a ministry, a nonprofit, a business somewhere down the road, here's 5 of the biggest questions you need to start wrestling with and get clarity around. And so those 7 weeks help leaders really say, uh, I either am ready for what's next and to implement this, or I need some more time getting a better understanding of the dream that God's put on my heart before I really start to put legs under it for other people to be a part of it.
Is that just in Chicago, or where is LINC?
Yeah, LINC is in 10 different cities now. And so Houston, Dallas, Southern California, the Bay Area, Seattle, Las Vegas, St. Louis, Chicago, Milwaukee, and the Twin Cities are all in one way or another either just getting started or have been going. Houston's been going for 20 plus years now. So here in Chicago, we are just celebrating our 5th year of having LINC in Chicago.
Okay. So what do you do at LINC?
Yeah, so I'm the city director here in Chicago, which means I get to work with our team and collaborate with networks, church planters, nonprofit leaders in identifying leaders around the city who really have that dream that God's put on their heart and inviting them to be a part of LINC's process, inviting them to not walk alone in what they're doing, and helping them see how much support really exists for them from our generous donors who make all of this possible to incredible nonprofit leaders that started cutting their teeth on this 15, 20 years ago and now get to walk alongside of these leaders as a coach, a strategic guide, and then partnering them up with a spiritual guide, somebody who says starting a nonprofit is requiring strategy, but the kind of nonprofit that we're starting, even more importantly, requires spiritual covering. Like we want the Spirit of God to be at work in this and to guide us, to give us wisdom, to protect us, and to walk with us every step of the way, helping open doors where we can't open those doors ourselves.
So why do you think God specifically called you to do this? What is in your past
Mm,
that you think, or in your formation, that is very helpful for LINC?
yeah, yeah, great question. It was coming out of 2018. I did a lot of, I mean, you could say arguing with God,
Mhm.
venting with God, uh, and exploring how God uniquely created me. Um, and for for a number of years after 2018, it was kind of, I wonder what that looks like. It became more and more clear. Then had some dear friends and even mentors in my life help me get really clear about why God put me on this earth. And and for me, those two words are catalyzing momentum. Like I go nuts if I'm not helping somebody else gain momentum in the thing that God's called them to do. You know, I love getting to walk alongside of people in that way. I love uh, getting to help them gain clarity in what's next for them or the organization that they lead. I love getting to help them experience traction in their mission towards the vision that God's calling them to be living into. And so, LINC, I found myself even wanting to just create. I didn't know it was going to be LINC, but I found myself wanting to create something like LINC. And so, like exploring that with friends and neighbors and people who are Christian and people who are not Christian, and just discovering how do you how do you help more people get momentum in the thing that they were created for. And thank God LINC is the place where I've landed, because that's exactly what we get to do. We get to hear people's passion. And usually when we first get to work with them, it sounds like a lot of word vomit. You know, it's like it's ideas and it's passion and it's excitement and it's all those things. And over the course of time walking together, it becomes very clear and it becomes very sharp and it begins to be very focused, to be very impactful in the thing that God's calling them to do.
Yeah, where you're sitting, I had Jeff Meyer, uh,
Yeah.
and he is. I'm hearing a very similar story about dreams and accelerating those dreams, and kind of drilling down and finding some momentum as well as focus on those dreams. So, you two need to get together, I think, if you
I
haven't
love
already. That's
Absolutely. Jeff has a real gift and a passion to help people get clear about how they can make an impact in their community.
Sure is. So I truly believe that's a ministry, even though you may not be part of, you're not a pastor in a congregation like I am. But what are things that you going in? This is I knew this was going to be like this, but then what are some of the things that kind of just came out of left field and it's like I had no idea this was going to be like this.
Ooh, great question. Um, boy, I kind of anticipated Christians collaborating all around Chicagoland being a tough nut to crack. Um, I am learning lots of stories of people who have tried this in years past. Um, I see growing excitement for it. I see more people wanting or kind of waking up to the idea of how desperately we need to collaborate together. Um, but I don't know if I thought it would be such a touchy subject around Chicago, and that's for pastors, that's for churches, that's denominations, that's networks, that's Christians, that's church members, non-church members. I mean, it's everybody. It's what can how much do things really have to hurt for us around Chicago for us to say we actually really need this, and collaboration is no longer optional, right? In Chicagoland, in the year 2000, there were 12,800 Christian churches in Chicagoland. In 2020, just 20 years later, it was cut in half to 6,500 Christian churches in Chicagoland. And then a pandemic happened, and churches closed at a more rapid rate in the last 5 years. And I don't know what the numbers are today, but I'm imagining it's much less than 6,500. So um, the question, I think, is how much more do things have to hurt for the Christian church in Chicagoland to be willing to set some things aside, not compromise doctrine or those kinds of things. We all need those things, but to say, like, for the sake of loving our neighbor, for the sake of making an impact, I'm willing to lean into this challenge with churches and Christians all over the city.
When Jesus established the Christian church, sends the Holy Spirit, Pentecost, and Acts chapter 2, and the explosion that happened in Jerusalem, and then just it was like a grenade in a pond. It just the ripples went out, and it turned the whole world upside down. The Roman world at that point, and beyond the Roman world. It's almost, how could it not work that way? It was such an incredible message of grace and gospel and love that the world certainly, 3,000 in one day, and then another 5,000, and people just coming and flocking to hear the gospel message in the first century, the first 3 centuries. Now we're in the 21st century, and you've heard this before, that we're in this postmodern era, or even the post-Christian era, and we see that evidence of that all over the place. You've got, especially in the cities, in the urban areas. Chicago is one of those. It's third largest city in the United States, or maybe now fourth. Dallas maybe third now. Los Angeles second. New York first. And so, uh, no less powerful would be the gospel in the 21st century. What do you think is the church's particular and also peculiar mission now, 2,000 years after that first mission of bringing the gospel to the world? What the mission hasn't changed, obviously. It's go and make disciples, baptizing and teaching. But what is it that the 21st century church, Christians, you and I, and the people that we live with, our followers of Jesus, what is our mission in today's world?
Mhm. That's a great question. It's interesting. At least in the United States, the culture that we live in is, like you said, um, shifting much more towards a post-Christendom culture, and certainly the trends show us that. There are some unique data points in the last year or two that show that there's a resurgence of young men coming back to the church, which I love seeing that. Um, but the church today operates with the same kinds of functions, polity, and even, I mean, dare I say, entitlement that was fitting for a majority culture 40, 50, 60 years ago, when the church was at the center of the culture. Literally, church buildings are being built in the town square, right? Like not just, from any kind of trusted voice socially, but even uh, physically. The church is in the center of the city 50, 60, 70 years ago, and people wanted it that way. Today, interesting enough, Barna did some research, and it asked people, how willing are you to think that a pastor is trustworthy? And 60 to 67% of Americans said that, yeah, they're at least somewhat trustworthy. The funny thing was, they asked that same question of pastors, and 100% of pastors said, why would anybody not think I was trustworthy? Right. So pastors definitely view themselves as trustworthy for good reason, but it's not viewed that way necessarily in
Mhm.
culture. um there is something that needs to be said for the way the church operates in view of that culture shift. And Kerry Newhoff, I heard him speak here in Chicago earlier this summer. He talked about some of the dynamics of shifting from a majority culture to a minority culture. And the big thing that I took away is, there were luxuries afforded to the church 70 years ago because it was very much widely accepted in the culture, and was even, the majority of the American population would consider themselves Christian. And certainly it's still, up there, but it's very different today. And so, what are the luxuries that we as Christians, kind of, I wouldn't say we necessarily took for granted over the last 50, 60 years, but are no longer afforded today because of the culture that we live in? And I think what we're finding is that it demands the church to be more organic and incarnational. 50, 60 years ago, you could rely on the programs and systems of the church to attract people in, to connect with people, to provide services, to meet people's needs. Um, Now, I think most churches are saying, how do we do more with less time, less money, less energy, and less people? Um, it requires an empowering of the people of God to live out their faith outside the walls of the church. And I think that is a very unique thing that maybe the church has kind of uh, fallen out of practice with because, 30 years ago, literally uh, uh, a lot of people were hearing from their pastor, you just get your friends in church and I'll do the rest of the work as the pastor. Now it's not the case.
Mhm.
Now we want the people of God who have the Spirit of God living in them to be equipped in a way to bring the gospel outside the walls of the church. And so it's a different set of muscles for the people of God to exercise than maybe what
Sure.
we're accustomed to.
The 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 specific challenges of the inner city church, I think, is important to drill down a little bit on here. Um, we have I would think that many of the new church starts and the pastors that are called to start new churches would be more in the urban areas because, as you said, there's not as many churches in the city anymore. And so, what's that challenge for the pastors who either are coming from an established congregation or right out of the seminary, and the leaders of these churches? What's the specific challenge of an inner city church?
Yeah, man, great question. Hmm. I was just on a call yesterday with somebody who helps plant churches interdenominationally, and it there's a lot that depends on the route that the pastor takes to becoming a church planter. So if you go through a traditional route where being a pastor is your full-time career and demands it because maybe you have educational debt from going through seminary, whatever it may be, you need a full-time job. And the support for church planting doesn't exist in the same way that it did even when I was planting a church almost 15 years ago. It's there's typically across the board less people to plant the church with that would go from a mother church if you're doing the launch large model, right? Um, there's probably tighter budgets today for most churches than there were 15 years ago, and so financially you have the challenges of that, and so there would be those kinds of challenges for pastors coming from that route. That also then brings up the timeline thing too. Like it used to be when I planted, you have 3 years of support and you have to be self-sustaining at the end of those 3 years. Well, a lot of research, especially from Ed Stetzer's voice and his partners, would tell you that most church plants now not only need 5 years, but it's really should be planted with a strategic plan and emphasis on it taking 10 years. And so that takes patience.
Hmm.
And all Christians uh, don't like God's timing nearly as much as they like their idea of their
Yeah.
timing. I find myself in that camp
Yep.
all the time. And so that requires a different strategy, whether it's co-vocational, bivocational, working for the church planter. There's actually a lot of missional advantages to that, where planters are then able to stay in the community where they already are, where they already have trusted relationships, and be able to connect with people in the community in that way.
It used to be that the inner city churches would then plant the churches out in the suburbs as members started to go out to the suburbs. Do you think it might be reversed today? Some of the established, like our church here, where I'm lead pastor, is an established church in the suburbs. But do you think that there's a challenge to the members out in established churches to go back to the inner city and start doing that? And what can members of the congregation, not necessarily the pastors, but the people in the pews, what can they do to help the inner city churches?
This is a huge part of what we're trying to wrestle to the ground at LINC because it's going to take a truly collaborative effort from everyone in the Chicagoland area. Um, it requires the raising up of leaders in the city, but it also requires the raising up of leaders in the suburbs too. Wherever God has put you, it is important that we're investing in Christians to lead where they are for the sake of the kingdom. And so when I do think that what you're talking about, uh, suburban churches planting uh, churches in the city, that's already happening. I know the church we're a part of supports a very new church plant, where a seminary graduate is leading an existing long time standing congregation in the city. And it is the goal and objective to also plant a Spanish speaking congregation out of that community. So um, when Christians in the suburbs are saying, "What can we do?" Um, Oftentimes, what I'm hearing is there's a lot of fear. Um, does this require I need to go in to the city? I don't know. I hear bad headlines in the city. Um, it I mean, in Chicago, the logistical problem of driving into the city is not easy. I mean, have you been on Interstate 90, 94 lately and what
Yes,
they're
I
doing?
have.
That is a nightmare, right?
Yep.
And so there's logistical problems, and it's not reasonable for us to expect um, people to get into the city. And
It's interesting how you were talking about the getting into the city itself. I mean, people are afraid. There's so much violence in the cities. At least the headlines are that way. But the neighborhoods these churches are in, that's where people are. And so we support a church in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago. It was an established Lutheran church with a school. In fact, the school building is on the National Historic Register, but it no longer exists as a school. And now it's a Pilsen neighborhood used to be a German neighborhood. It's in the name, but now it's very much Hispanic. And so there is a Spanish-speaking pastor, and his wife is a deaconess, and so we help them out. But what are those neighborhoods? What's the challenges of being in those different neighborhoods in the inner city that the church might be facing?
Oh man, great question. I think in some ways, in the past, multicultural ministry, we could approach that as if it was optional, and I don't think that's a reality that the church can continue to embrace. Um, there's a church in Albany Park that we work closely with, and they have 130 different nationalities in their neighborhood. I mean, just the
Amazing.
challenges of connecting with so many different, and what that demands of the church then, and it forces us to just think differently. I can't just start a worship service and expect 130 different nationalities to understand what we're saying if they're even open to walking through the doors of our church. And so some of the important work that we're doing at LINC is empowering Christians to connect in those neighborhoods in a way that it adds momentum and energy to the local church. Not to replace the local church, but to say the church needs help having deeper roots into the community here. And so they're at Tabor Church in Albany Park. One of their lay leaders, my friend Steve, he's looking at their building and saying, how do we create space that our community can connect here? And so he started a pottery warehouse. It's called Earthen Warehouse. You can check it out online. You can even subscribe to his newsletter. He's doing amazing stuff, connecting lots of different kinds of people, Christian, not yet Christian, folks who come from all different kinds of backgrounds. And if you've ever made something with your hands, it doesn't matter who you're sitting at the table with. You're going to start connecting with that person if you're there for an hour or 2 hours using your creativity and molding something with your hands. It's amazing the kind of connection that comes from that. And that's just one part of the puzzle of finding out how do we connect in our neighborhood, that they're exploring lots of different ventures and how they utilize their building to connect in the neighborhood.
I think that's something that's lost in the training of church leaders is the intimate one-on-one relationship connection. It's no longer like you said. You can't just build a church and people will come in the door because it's a church. That's just what we do. It's about making connections. That's very first century church stuff. It was about talking to friends, talking to family, and just sharing, getting involved in their lives. You mentioned earlier too about mentors, and I wanted to ask you about your personal mentors in your journey to get you. Who were some of those people in your life? Not, I mean, certainly, I'm talking specific. Who are they? But I want people to understand that there are people in our lives that can really help us if we just understand they can really help us. So that's why I asked the question: Who were your mentors?
Absolutely. And not only can they help us, but I would bet you $1 million. Actually, don't quote me on that. I don't have $1 million to bet, but I bet anybody listening to this, God's given you everything you need to be that person in somebody else's
Yep.
life to speak belief into them. I've seen it time and time again. So it goes out to my dear friend Alan Lull, who was my youth director, and now he just retired from youth ministry in West Bend, Wisconsin. I'm going to get to see him in just a couple of weeks and celebrate him. But he would just take me after school, me and my buddy Steve. We'd sit in his old beat up car that most youth directors have, right? And we would just talk about life. And it'd be everything from girls to family to school to read scripture. We would pray for each other and we would just lean into how does Jesus meet us in our lives. And that was where I first started getting discipled to see faith in my everyday life. It was also the first time that I was ever asked to lead anything. It was probably in seventh or eighth grade. And it's interesting. I was working with a church in Atlanta a couple of years ago. And out of their clarity process, they discovered that the number one goal for their youth ministry was to make sure they were the first organization to give middle schoolers an opportunity to lead. Because they knew once they get into high school starts asking you to lead and do all kinds of things and band and sports and be a leader over here and part of student council or whatever it is. And by the time the church gets around to asking their young people to be involved, they're already committed to everything else. And so inviting young people to lead, that changed the trajectory of my life for sure. More recently, to be mentored and just blessed in a big way by Michael Eckelkamp. Michael is a pastor now in Lincoln, Nebraska. That dude stepped in during that hard season of my life, and he literally believed things and saw things in me that I was like, I don't even know what you could possibly mean by that. Like, I I think I'm probably done, right? I was ready to be done with ministry, and he walked with me, and that meant the world, still means the world. I learned so much from him, and love still getting to connect with him. It's just a tremendous blessing.
Yeah, it's the phrase you just mentioned, he walked with you. That's exactly what this is all about, isn't it? It's just walking alongside with people, talking to them, about life, doing life together. I love it. I love it. So I want to kind of wrap things up a little bit. I'm watching the clock here, and I want to give you what I call the billboard question. So you live in the Arlington Heights area. And one of the things that I love about Route 53 going into Schaumburg is that they have these electronic billboards now. You can change the message and put several of them on there. Somebody got really smart about that. So I'm gonna give you one of those, and you're gonna have an opportunity to reach the millions of people that drive by every day, but only got 5, 10 seconds. So you let's get a message up there. What is it that they can see and read for 5 to 10 seconds that they're driving in their car that you want them to say? You want them to hear. What's that message say?
If I were to say it right now, I would say, hmm, The dream that God's put on your life is there for a reason. Be anchored in God. No matter what you're pursuing, God's created you for that. But more importantly than anything, anchor your life in God. Everything else is going to disappoint. You'll find everything else fades. God is truly there to anchor your life, no matter what happens.
Anchored in God. That's excellent. Excellent. And I think that's what we'll call this episode, being anchored in God, having the dreams anchored in God. Hey, I always ask because I love to read, whether it's on my tablet or I'm actually I love holding books, paper and ink. What are some books that you might say, hey, I need you to read this? You're going to gift that to them as a gift. What are some of those books that you would want people to have?
Yeah. First book. This is all about being clear about how God created you, and it's called The Voice of the Heart by Chip Dodd. It helps you understand your feelings and understanding how those impact the way that you show up in your everyday life. And really, I mean, bring you back to being anchored in God no matter what you're feeling. And so that led me to a coaching relationship with an organization called Tin Man Ministries that is the best investment I've ever made in myself, my marriage. So The Voice of the Heart by Chip Dodd. The second most important book that I probably read in the last 10 years would be Todd Bolsinger's Canoeing the Mountains. That really helps leaders understand what it takes to lead an adaptive organization with an adaptable posture, knowing that you can't predict the future and we don't operate in the same culture that we used to 30, 40 years ago. Shoot, 6 years ago. We had a pandemic, right? Yeah. So Canoeing the Mountains, I'm always going back to that one. And then the other one that more recently has kind of stirred my thinking is called The Other Half of Church. And that one kind of brings together, I'll say, disciple making and brain science together to understand how you were created with the way that your brain works and what that looks like in the context of disciple making and community. Was just really helpful to think, gosh, I'm literally wired for this. The way God formed my brain and my heart and my emotions and all of that, wired for community in following Christ. That was a helpful book for me too.
So what's next for Dave? What's on your horizon right now?
Well, we got the first week of school done. So how about week 2? We'll take week 2 of school for our kids. But for us at LINC, the next thing is creating more chairs at the table for collaboration, for citywide impact and transformation. Really think there's something unique stirring that over the next 5 years, we could see a beautiful network bubble up around Chicago that deepens collaboration amongst Christians, pastors, churches, nonprofits, businesses. And so we're going to get after that in Chicagoland. And glad that we get to serve in that kingdom work alongside of you.
That's excellent. So, well, thanks, Dave. Thank you for joining me today and showing that people can be inspired to reflect God's light and love in this increasingly dark world. Thank you so much for joining me.
Amen. This was a joy, Ed. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Dave Ficken on the Reflection Podcast. And there are links to LINC in the description of this podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're looking at that and maybe clicking through and going over and checking more about LINC, also think about rating and leaving a comment for this show, a review of this episode. That helps us to get out to more and more people. The more reviews we have, especially 5-star reviews, we are really appreciative of those. More and more people will be able to hear and maybe be inspired, like we hope that you are, to reflect the love of Jesus Christ in this dark world and the light of God in this dark world on the Reflection Podcast, which is a production of St. Matthew Lutheran Church in Hawthorne Woods, Illinois. To find out more about St. Matthew and maybe to begin a plan of visiting our congregation, go to our website at www.stmatts.net, stmats.net, to plan your visit. All of our worship services and many of our Bible studies and other events are on our website, as well as our YouTube channel and our Facebook page. And those services are streamed live as they happen and then are available as recordings afterwards. I thank you for joining me today. Again, review this, rate it, gets us out in more and more platforms, and more people then can be inspired, like we hope you were, to reflect the love of Jesus Christ and the light of Jesus Christ in this increasingly dark world. I hope you will join me again next time on the Reflection Podcast.